How's that? Is that back? All right, that's back online. I transitioned. I had the wrong mic set up there. My audio settings are weird today. I've been joining my Zoom calls today and everything, and it just hasn't been like it's been the wrong speakers. It's been the wrong microphone. It's been all sorts of weird stuff today. So I am thrilled. I figured that out. I remember when I was first starting these postcasts last year, I had to make sure I had somebody always on the postcast when I started, just to make sure that I had the correct the correct volume settings going. So let's see here. Make sure that we're okay. We're live, and we're happy to have you here. I gotta crack open this beer. This is a big night. Whew. Let's see. I'm checking out all these messages here from everyone messaging me about this trade today. Messaging me about, obviously, what do I think? What do I think about the, wow. I've had a lot of thoughts. I'm quick to digest things, and so I've kind of like processed all my thoughts, but I really want to go back to square one and kind of elucidate what I'm actually thinking about this. But first, I'm going to pour out this beer into a glass for me to drink. We're not dumping this one out. This is from Firestone Brewing Company in California. Firestone Walker Brewing Company, I'm sorry, in California. I'm not sure where exactly in California our friends are, but this is called their Parabolita as part of their Proprietor's Vintage Series. This is a bourbon barrel-aged stout. It's their salted caramel version, so it's got a little hint of salt to go along with cocoa and vanilla. I don't know where the caramel comes in. I think the caramel just comes from the natural beer flavor. I don't think they added any caramelized sugars to this. I think just the natural sugars of the beer itself is kind of what they're relying on. And I've had this one before. It's quite good, so I'm here to drink and enjoy that with you tonight as we talk about this trade. Jazz get blown out. I'll mention a little bit about that, a little bit going on. I'm a little salty still from the Dallas loss, and so I am a little bit edgier about the way the Jazz lost tonight, but given that they just lost 4 of their teammates, I don't really know where they're headed. They lost by a significant amount with nobody really putting a whole lot of effort. I think the Jazz only shot tonight was Lauri Markkanen's steady stoicism, right? And that just wasn't really going to happen. So I'm thrilled to be here, though, and to break this down. So I'm trying to think about where to start here to talk about this big trade. Let's break it down at least to what it is, right? Because I think we have a fairly complicated version of what we have. So we have a 3-team trade involving the Timberwolves, who we played against tonight. This is the big trade. It is trading Mike Conley away. It is trading Malik Beasley away. It is trading Jared Vanderbilt away. Now, Nickeil Alexander-Walker was also involved in this deal, but he's not exactly a contributing player. He doesn't really matter. I'm not really sure why he was included in the deal. I didn't immediately see his need for salary matching, so not quite a big deal. Mike Conley together with Beasley and Vanderbilt, they are all going to... Beasley and Vanderbilt are going to Los Angeles, and Mike Conley's being redirected to Minnesota because Los Angeles really wanted D'Angelo Russell in the deal. So the draft compensation is the Jazz get a top 4 protected 2027 Los Angeles Lakers first-round pick. That immediately transfers into a 2027 second-round pick if it doesn't convey to the Jazz. So in actuality, like if the Lakers have a pick in the top 4, that means that they would have the 31st, 32nd, 33rd, or 34th pick in that draft, and that would be what instead goes to the Jazz. Assuming no expansion before then, by the way, which I think is a sneaky, interesting part of it. The Lakers were never going to encumber their 2029 first-round draft pick, and that's what would happen. So if the Lakers... if that protection does fall in 2027, the natural thing to do with these protected picks is to say, oh, well, you keep your pick this year, but just give us your first-round pick the next year. The problem if you do that, if you're the Lakers, is that if you have protections that extend into it, you can only trade a first-round pick 2 years after the maximum conveyable pick. So if you say, hey, this pick will roll over into 2028, and right now 2029 is the furthest draft pick you could possibly trade by any team this year, because you can't trade further than 7 years out, you're ended up with a situation where if that doesn't convert into a second, the Lakers cannot trade their 2029 first round draft pick now or this summer. So just to summarize that real quickly, the Jazz, they do not get the Lakers 2027 first round pick if it falls within the top 4. They don't get any first round pick if it falls within the top 4. They would instead get the Lakers second round pick of that year, which if they had a top 4 protected pick is going to be somewhere in the very early second round. And the reason for that is so that the Lakers are still able to trade their 2029 first round draft pick right now, but more likely you would this summer the Lakers have the ability to then trade their 2028 and 2030 first round draft picks. So Ken Clayton also accurately corrects me, is that, hey, if the Lakers have later lottery odds and they jump into the top 4, the second round is just based on record. It's not based on a lottery system. So it's just based on wherever they fell in the standings. So it could be 37, but in order to jump into the top 4, you got to be a little lucky. So it's not like it probably won't be like the 43rd pick or something like that. Probably, but we're all dealing with the Utah Jazz here, where bad things happen always. Cheers to everybody here on Salt City Hoops, live postcast and beer. I have my beer here. As you're watching on YouTube, you see this wonderful dark caramel beer. This is a 9.2% sea salt caramel bourbon barrel aged stout. Happy to have it here. If you're on Spaces, you're going to hear me talk about this trade a little bit. Loosely talk about the game, talk about Luka Garza's skyhook over Walker Kessler at the end of the game. Let's keep talking about this trade. So, the Jazz received no additional compensation. To make the players kind of work, the Jazz are taking on Juan Toscano-Anderson, who is on a minimum deal this year. And if you're thinking like, that guy's young, he's only been in the NBA for a couple years. The guy's been playing in Mexico and other foreign leagues for a long time. So he's already 29 years old. He is not a useful asset. He's just a guy. So Juan Toscano-Anderson, he's had his moments with the championship Warriors. He's just a guy. He shouldn't register with you whatsoever. The Jazz are also getting Damian Jones, who is a former first-round pick center. I think he started his career in Atlanta. Who was he? He was drafted by the Warriors with the 30th overall pick. That's right. So he's played with the Warriors. He's played with the Hawks. He's played with the Suns. When he was with the Hawks, he was dangerously close to being washed out of the NBA. He was quite poor, and then had a very poor post-COVID session with the Phoenix Suns. He only played 14 games for the Suns over a 2-year span, and then I think he kind of rejuvenated his career with the Lakers, signing a couple 10 days in 2021, and then he parlayed that into a couple more 10 days with the Kings, and signed a rest of season deal with the Kings, and then turned that into a 2-year deal with the Lakers. So he weirdly has a player option next year. I'm talking way too much about Damian Jones. We have a backup center on a $2.5 million player option for next year. That is who Damian Jones is. He's already 27 years old. He is a former 30th overall pick. He's shown some promise here and there, but he's a backup center. Nothing to worry about. Also, technically coming to the Jazz is Russell Westbrook. His $44 million contract will be immediately bought out by the Jazz. The terms of that have not... The terms of that buyout have not been announced, but unlike other buyouts, I think Russell Westbrook will be particularly incentivized to accept a lot of different buyout terms. I'm not even sure if he's a minimum candidate. I think there are a couple teams with cap space who actually might say, like, hey, I'll give you a $5 million contract to kind of just play out the string for us. Maybe push for a play-in spot because the West is so jumbled. I don't immediately have my cap space figures in front of me. But if it's not a cap space team, a team would have to sign him for the minimum, which a team is always allowed to sign a player at the minimum pending their roster spot availability, or an existing exception. right? So they would have to have part of their mid-level exception that's not being used. You don't have to use that in the offseason. You can use it in the middle of the season, and they could use that for Russell Westbrook. As much as we feel what we feel about Russell Westbrook, I think there will be some teams who are willing to pay above the minimum and have part of their exceptions available to trade for him. So I don't see that buyout being particularly contentious. Sometimes players they want the full $44 million, and the team is only willing to give them a little bit less than that because they don't think what they can get on the open market. Russell Westbrook doesn't want to play here. That buyout should be very easily negotiated. The compensation, just to close out the actual transaction too, Alexander Walker will go to Minnesota in this deal. Have to kind of analyze where that's going. The Lakers give a second-round pick to Minnesota, and the Jazz give up 2 second-round picks to Minnesota. So Minnesota, by swapping out D'Angelo Russell for Mike Conley, Minnesota does 2 things. One, with D'Angelo Russell expiring this year, they were facing an issue where, because they're over the cap, they have very limited ways to sign free agents. So by having Conley have another year left to go on his contract, they're extending the life of that salary spot a little bit. But also, it's unclear if Mike Conley is even worse than D'Angelo Russell. He's probably a little worse than D'Angelo Russell, even though Russell has his own sore spots as a basketball player. But the Wolves picked up 3 second-round picks for their trouble. I have always been loath to give up second-round picks for nothing. I was way too angry about the Matt Thomas trade a few years ago, giving up a second-round pick for a garbage player. But in sort of a big transaction like this, if all the parties involved are like, hey, we're just trying to get this deal done, and Minnesota is holding the phone over a second round pick because of the quality that they're losing D'Angelo Russell, it's all right, fuck it, man, I'll give you a second round pick, please go away. It's almost like it. Nobody knows if this is true or not, obviously, but doesn't it have the feeling of Minnesota getting fleeced by Utah and having Utah and Los Angeles agree to this big deal where Utah is sending them real players, right? And Los Angeles was ostensibly happy with Mike Conley being part of this deal. But maybe if Mike Conley was who LA was getting instead of D'Angelo Russell, that protection on the 2027 pick wouldn't be so good. It would be like a top 15 protected pick or something way worse that Utah is not interested in. And because Utah fleeced Minnesota this summer, it kind of had the feeling of Minnesota being like, oh, you guys want to do your big deal? Well, we're going to hold it up if you guys don't give us an additional 2 second-round picks, right? And everyone's looking at Minnesota rolling their eyes at how annoying they're being. And ultimately, Danny Ainge said, fine, we'll give you your fucking second-round picks. Just get the deal done. Please leave. I think that is a big reason why we had such a big announcement in the middle of the day today. It was at noon or 12:30 or 1 o'clock or something that we heard about the transaction, but it wasn't until just before tip, 5 hours later, that the deal was actually kind of pseudo-official. I'm not sure if it's actually been called in yet. Usually it doesn't become official until the teams kind of post, their PR releases about it and everything. Weirdly, this also means we don't get a Mike Conley return visit. I just realized that we can't give Mike Conley his return video until next season, unless the Jazz and the Wolves meet in the play-in game or something. The compensation part of it, I am agreeing with every fan out there who says, I have been told, not just by Jazz fans and Jazz experts and Mark himself, that each of Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, and Mike Conley were worth first-round picks. Why are we getting just 1 first-round pick instead of 3? That seems worse. And I'm pulling up a couple thoughts that I had written down here. So, what the Jazz don't want is they don't need a bevy of bad draft picks, right? They have a bunch of existing first rounders already. And so now the Jazz are trying to go for premium picks. They're saying we only want stuff that actually has a chance of being game-changing players. We have plenty of picks from Philly and Brooklyn and Minnesota and Cleveland, like these picks, they could all be in the 20s for all we know, right? Like if you're trading a good player like Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert to those teams, they're going to be good for a little while. And sure, the 2029 and 2027 picks look so good, but that's a long ways from now. They also have a lot of these short-term picks, right? Like we have Minnesota's pick this year. We have the worst of Brooklyn and Philly's pick this year from the Royce O'Neal trade. We have a lot of bad first-rounders coming down the pike. So what Danny Ainge is valuing, and we don't know what trades were out there, right? But if usually people like Zach Lowe and are not wrong when he's saying, like, I think there's probably a protected first-round pick out there for Malik Beasley. I was kind of thinking Vanderbilt was more of like the 2 good seconds or a challenge trade where you're trading the flawed Vanderbilt for another team's other flawed young guy, right? A Vanderbilt Matisse Thybulle type of challenge trade, right? Where you're taking on, that trade 1-for-1 wouldn't be exact, but I was thinking like, okay, you're trading Vanderbilt for different problems, and sometimes different problems you put them in a new system and see what they work, because Vanderbilt just wasn't working out. And Mike Conley, with his salary and his role, he's not really quite a first round pick, but he's close, right? And so there were ways in which all 3 of those players could be worth the first round pick. Malik Beasley definitely worth a protected first round pick in my opinion on his own, but not like a lightly protected 2027 pick. I'm talking like a top 20 protected first round pick in 2024, which what is that doing for the Jazz in the rebuild, right? So let's say you have 2 second round picks available for Vanderbilt. You really have no market for Mike Conley at all. I'm just telling a story here. You have not really a great market for Conley, so you're leaning towards keeping him. You have 2 second round picks on the table for Vanderbilt, and you have a top 20 protected pick available for Malik Beasley. So you're in that situation, you're acquiring a bevy of poor to okay assets, and instead the Jazz packaged that all up, and they said, give us the top 4 protected 2027 Lakers first. If you want to think about it in a direct trade, right, would you trade straight up a 2027 top 4 protected Lakers pick in exchange for the 20th pick in the 2024 NBA draft? And 2 second-round picks? I don't think you would. I think you would hold on to that 2027 top 4 protected pick. And I feel like I'm those fans who were lauding what great a job Ty Corbin was doing when the Jazz were playing Richard Jefferson and losing, but kind of winning and not doing a great job. We had a big issue with how O'Connor was running the team, and nothing really seemed to kind of get the team off this treadmill of mediocrity. I do think that this transaction screams, we're making the bigger play. We're getting way worse. The quantity of shit we're getting doesn't jump off the page like the Gobert or Mitchell trades, right? But we weren't trading away Gobert or Mitchell in this instance. Instead, we traded 3 quarters for $1, right? Or, and maybe a 50-cent piece and 2 quarters for $1. And the whole dollar is always going to be worth more than those 3 individual parts. I quibble with giving up the additional 2 second rounders to Minnesota. I don't think that was necessary. I quibble with the top 4 protection a little bit. I think if you were to, with how Danny Ainge has negotiated these deals for Gobert and Mitchell, I really think that they could have turned around to Los Angeles with LeBron James and their situation and said, all right, guys, we're top 4 isn't good enough, right? We just gave up 2 additional seconds. You're going to lower the protections down to a top 2, right? You don't think LA would agree to that tomorrow? I think they might have. I think they might have agreed to that. So I quibble a little bit with the top 4 protection, but are we really going to downgrade the Jazz over 2 selections? And it takes it from a great trade to a pretty great trade, I guess. So I understand from everybody that the quantity of picks doesn't look great, but a couple of years from now, we're going to look at this, post-LeBron Lakers team and be like, shit, Lakers are ass, right? And you don't want them to be so bad that it doesn't convey, but all of a sudden it kind of looks like maybe this 5th or 6th pick in the draft, right? You're going into that 2027 lottery kind of hoping a team jumps LA or something, which is very likely with the smoothed out lottery odds. It's very intriguing. I don't like the trade, but I think every team in the deal, except for Minnesota, who I think did pretty well, Minnesota having a slight downgrade at the point guard position, getting a point guard that will play better in their system alongside Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, and Rudy Gobert, right? Getting a player in that position, a little bit more of an adult in the room for a team whose culture seems to be fracturing, in no small part due to Russell. But every team can look at this deal and be like, I think it could have been better. And I think that's indicative of a very fair trade. I don't think Danny Ainge won this trade. I think it ended up with, I think it's a fair trade. So, if you're listening or watching, I'm always happy to take your comments and questions and whatever. I'm drinking a beer. This is my 9.2% bourbon barrel aged sea salt caramel imperial stout. It is quite good. Glad to have you here on the Salt City Hoops live postcast and beer. If you want to drop a comment, if you want to ask to speak on Spaces, I'm always happy to have you. R. Valen says, the trade was a gut punch for the Jazz players, especially coming, as it did with Conley, Vanderbilt, and NAW warming up before it was announced. Was Malik Beasley not warming up? No, I'm just kidding. I wasn't surprised that the Jazz lost the game. Yeah, look, the Jazz got blown out straight from the beginning. They had a great comeback in the second quarter to get within 5, and then they give up a bucket, and then the Jazz have possession of the ball at the end of the first half for the last shot of the first half, and Jordan Clarkson takes an extremely ill-advised contested layup with like 7 seconds left on the clock, and Minnesota goes down and they get a 3, and for what ended up being the last possession of the game. So the Jazz were looking to be down by single digits, and they ended up being down 10 at half, and then they got blown out 40-21 in the third quarter. Clarkson was miserable. He just didn't give a shit the entire game. Walker Kessler didn't look as spry as he usually does. Oddly enough, Kessler looked his most spry in garbage time when he was just kind of like out there playing basketball to play basketball. I thought that was really impressive. But at that point, he's playing against the junior varsity squad for the Timberwolves. Lauri Markkanen was his steady self. Markkanen was not the reason the team lost today. I think Markkanen's defense, especially his fast break transition defense, was really quite shit. But his performance offensively was fine, and he has the verticality and the verve. He had a couple fuck you plays today where he really drove on some guys, and when he had smaller guys guarding him, he was just kind of took it personally and made some buckets. Not the most efficient night, but a fairly efficient night for him. Minnesota goes 23 of 43 from 3. That's 54% from 3, but all of these shots, a lot of them were wide open. Jalen Noel, talented little two-guard. Is he a rookie or is he in his second year? He's in his third year. He's a second-round pick. He's been having a nice year off the bench, 11 points off the bench for Minnesota this year. He just had wide-open threes all game. He was 6 of 9 from 3. But then you get Jaden McDaniels, 2 of 4. Nas Reed was left wide open all game, intentionally, but I don't think that's a guy you leave wide open. You shouldn't, anyway. He goes 2 of 4. Taurean Prince, he made his contested threes. I thought we actually played him pretty well. He was great. And then Luka Garza just blew the doors off the Jazz in the third quarter. Garza goes 9 of 13 from the field. Garza, not a good three-point shooter. He goes 4 of 5 from 3 today. Nothing to talk about with the Jazz. Colin Sexton, I think he'll be an intriguing guy to watch. He's got the role for Mike Conley now, right? So he was the starting point guard today. He plays 31 minutes, 22 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. I am very intrigued to see what we're going to get out of Colin Sexton, because Colin Sexton is walking into a line, like the Jazz still have real NBA players on the court. There's a lot of talk on Twitter about like this team is total shit. We're doing the full super mega tank. Can't wait to see how this team just completely sucks ass the rest of the year. I get that entirely, but that's and they still have real NBA players. They have an all-star. Walker Kessler looks like a good defensive centerpiece. just have to remind myself who's on the team here. Kelly Olynyk is still a positive pro. Jordan Clarkson, he doesn't look to be traded. He's generally a positive presence on the court. So you get Sexton playing in a functional NBA offense, and I don't necessarily need Sexton to be on his A game and lead this team into the playoffs, but he's playing with real talent on the floor, and I want to see him grow. You always want to see players like Colin Sexton make the right kinds of mistakes. And that's what I will be watching for this year. And today I thought he was largely okay. He was absolutely torching the rim. His defense was absolutely miserable, as it usually is. But we will have to learn to live with that, I think, for the Jazz. I think it's going to be an offensive, like, learning to play offense for the Jazz, and the defense is going to have to come later. I hope the Jazz don't get as hamstrung with Kessler as they have with Rudy in the past, but that's a topic we can tackle another time. I'm really focused on how Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, and to a lesser extent Simone Fontecchio, I don't think Toscano Anderson is going to play over him, how Agbaji, Fontecchio, and Sexton, these are the big winners from this trade. These are the guys who are going to be playing 25 to 30 minutes now with no competition. How are they going to live up to that task? Fontecchio was kind of a struggle today. He was 1 of 7 from 3 today, but I do love that Fontecchio got up 7 threes in 23 minutes. A lot of it came in garbage time. His defense, I think he forced guys to the right spot. You couldn't just blow by him and get to the inside as usual. So I'm a big Fontecchio fan because of what he can be. I love his Italian game tape. I love his game. He's played pretty well for some teams overseas. I would love to see, we got Fontecchio under contract next year. I'd love to see something good coming out of that. Might open up some minutes for Leandro Bolmaro with Nickeil Alexander-Walker getting traded and Talen Horton-Tucker having his weird, on-off night that Talen Horton-Tucker usually has. You might have some room for Bolmaro. Our two-way guys, Micah Potter and Johnny Juzang, have both been playing great in the G League. Micah Potter is out for, I think, another 4 to 6 weeks with an elbow issue. He cleaned up some loose bone fragments, I think, in his elbow recently, so he'll be out for a little while. But Juzang's been playing fabulous for the Stars so far. I would love to see Juzang and Potter getting some minutes. But other than that, we have a real rotation of NBA guys. A starting roster of Sexton, Clarkson, Markkanen, Olynyk, and Kessler. That is a competitive starting lineup. The bench gets hairy. You put in the rookie Agbaji. You put in the rookie Fontecchio. You put in Talen Horton-Tucker. Of course, Rudy Gay. That becomes a weird kind of bench lineup, but things can happen. So, Kenneth922000 says, losing Conley is going to be a hard loss in the locker room and young player development. I understand the trade, but hate to lose all that Mike brings. I think that's the other part that rankles me a little bit, is for months I've been preaching, Kenneth, that the alternative for the Jazz is not doing a trade, which is not the worst thing in the world. Malik Beasley's under contract next year. Jared Vanderbilt's under contract next year. Mike Conley's under contract next year. The only one of these guys that's expiring is Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's in the trade for whatever reason. If Ken or Dan, if you guys are in the chat, I'd love to see if we can do this trade without Alexander-Walker. I really just don't understand his inclusion. Not that I give a shit. It's Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He's basically disappointed the Jazz since he's been here. So, sorry, I had to take a sip of this delicious beer. This is great. I got to drink more of this. So, not doing the trade is a benefit. Like, you can still trade these guys this offseason. You can trade them next trade deadline. I do think that Vanderbilt's trade value is at a fair low, and I only see it getting lower, right? Like, if you're a player who is starting to lose the trust from your head coach and you're not going to play as many minutes, and your role in the starting rotation has been supplanted by a rookie, I just don't think Vanderbilt's value is going to get higher. Malik Beasley, I think his value is kind of always going to stay the same. And Mike Conley, on an expiring contract, I'm not sure if a team is willing to say, hey, I'm going to make a big trade for Mike Conley on an expiring contract next year or this offseason. So I think there is a little bit of, you lose some value if you hold on to those guys. But I do think that a trade similar to this, would have been available next year to another desperate situation like the Lakers, right? And that's where I was mentioning quibbling about the protection on the pick is to say, look, man, if you don't want to do this deal, call us back next summer. It's similar to the trade that the Jazz ended up making for Mike Conley, right, with Memphis, where Memphis insisted on a valuation for Mike Conley and said, we're not doing this deal at the trade deadline. As you recall, this was the trade deadline where the Jazz were in playoff contention. They were in title contention, and they quite badly needed a point guard. And, Rubio was doing Rubio things, but he had his limitations. And there was an idea that Mike Conley would really elevate this playoff good Jazz team to over-the-top title contention. And those rumors weighed heavily on Rubio, as we later found out. Memphis said, fine, if you don't want to meet our asking price now, you're going to meet our asking price this summer. When you falter in the playoffs and you're going to come back to us and say, all right, we'll do the deal. We'll include the guys you want. We'll include the picks you want. And they'll... and that trade would have been available to them. I think similarly, the Jazz could have made a similar gambit with the Lakers and say, put your hands up. Say, like, all right, you're not going to give us that 2027 pick completely unprotected or top one protected. We'll see what your asking price is this summer. So with losing Conley, and I'm not just talking about them as assets, to your point, Kenneth, Mike Conley was providing real, player development for guys like Kessler, Markkanen, and Sexton. And if we're looking at all three of those guys being real NBA players for the next wonderful Jazz team, Conley was providing real shit. And it sucks to lose that for a draft pick that we're not going to see on the court for 4.5 years, right? I'm thinking about, my kids. I have a 3-year-old, I have an 18-month-old, and I've got another on the way. And thinking that, my youngest is going to be 4 years old before I know the quality of the Jazz draft pick is a little scary to think about at the end of the day. So Ken, always helpful, mentions that including Nickeil Alexander-Walker helps the Jazz get out of the tax, which is, as we all know, is extremely helpful. And being over the luxury tax, sure, you have to pay the tax payments based on how far over you are with your luxury tax, but if you are not in the tax, you get that luxury tax disbursement from the other teams, which this year, based on how much tax all the teams are paying, including the exorbitantly expensive Golden State Warriors, non-tax teams should get about $17 million apiece to the owner's bottom line. And these teams, these NBA teams, this is not going to be an owner pity party, please. I do not give a shit about billionaires. But the only point I'm going to make about the team is that these teams have gargantuan valuations, and if you want to make a profit, then just sell the team. But the actual day-to-day operations of running a team is actually not all that profitable. And so you have the situation like the Buss family is in, where the Buss family that owns the Lakers, they are not independently wealthy. They do not have a separate side business. Their entire business is the Los Angeles Lakers. So they're able to make profits and live like rich billionaires because the Lakers are a quality, great team, and you can do some other business things because they're the Lakers. But the Buss family does not have a separate business making a bunch of money. So they do actually care about things like tax payments, like the Lakers do. We think of the Lakers being this big, rich, expensive team, but getting that $17 million payment for a team like Ryan Smith is owning is actually pretty helpful when you're looking at where the team is acting from a financial perspective at the end of the day. So that was way too much talk about the luxury tax. We don't care about that. So let's see. Other reactions. What do the Jazz do with Russell Westbrook? He'll certainly be bought out. Clippers and Bulls interested in signing. Yeah, I was kind of both of those teams are certainly over the cap. I think the Clippers are in the tax, so that would be a very expensive signing for the Clippers. But the Clippers look to be moving on from John Wall, and adding a real distributor on that team is not the worst idea in the world, right? Like, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, decent facilitators, good ball handlers, but they are not LeBron James, right? And adding Russell Westbrook to a team like that is theoretically plausible. Like that could be a thing. So, interested in that perspective. Malik Beasley, I will be sad to have lost him. I really enjoyed having his half a season. Malik Beasley's kind of a curio as a personality. He seems like a fine guy and a happy guy, and would fit into the Jazz culture a little bit, but he's got a weird checkered past, and he dated Scottie Pippen's ex-wife for a while, and got into trouble with his now wife, who was then his girlfriend and mother to his 2 children, and that relationship seems to be better. So Malik Beasley seems like a weird guy altogether. Jared Vanderbilt, I've really soured on him over the year, but he seems like a decent guy that I've certainly enjoyed watching Jared Vanderbilt at the beginning of the season. I liked the Jared Vanderbilt experience for a while. I live in Denver, so I was able to see a lot of Jared Vanderbilt early on in his career when he was just a scrub. And I always loved when Jared Vanderbilt would come in the game when the games were out of hand, and he had that rangy athleticism that looked interesting. But as we found, Jared Vanderbilt never had that above-the-rim type of oomph and attitude. So, decent offensive rebounder based on kind of analyzing angles and kind of squirreling away and getting some of those, but he's kind of mischaracterized as this above-the-rim, sky-flying rebounder where he's just dominating on the glass. He's actually an average to poor defensive rebounder for his position. He makes a lot of defensive mistakes. For a guy who's ostensibly supposed to be a good on-ball stopper, he made a lot of defensive mistakes, so not super thrilled with where we were at from Jared Vanderbilt, and so I don't mind losing him. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, someday Alexander Walker will be put on a team where he is not asked to be a primary point guard. I think he looks way worse when he's asked to do primary ball handling responsibilities, and it only got way worse this year. So Nickeil Alexander-Walker was often tasked to be like a pure backup point guard, and he put up the worst turnover rate of his career. His three-point shot had actually became quite respectable. He shot over 40% from three. He's got real athleticism. He was the only Jazz player who could get over a screen, so I appreciated his defense, although he did foul a lot for his position. He did... and the fouls were always of like the two handsy variety, so his defense wasn't. He would be aggressive and he'd look good, but the defense wasn't as great in reality as you would think. So was largely disappointed with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Obviously, we traded a torn ACL Joe Ingles for him last year, and it was last deadline that I was screaming to the moon that we should have traded Joe Ingles' contract and as many first-round picks as could handle for like a real starting level player and do that finals push. I think I am proven more right now because if that didn't work out, you could trade Gobert and Mitchell for the returns you got this summer and completely reset. And the Jazz have this amazing array of draft picks that I just felt like they could have gone for it more last year, and to just like add Nickeil Alexander-Walker felt bad. Alexander-Walker had a few nice moments for the Jazz. Don't care. I mentioned on the screen, effort was a -10 today. Interested to hear the post-game comments from everybody. Let's go to Twitter and see what the Hardy comments were post-game. Let's go to the beat writers and see what they've been saying about the game. We'll see what the quotes are from various folks. Taylor Horton Tucker said that some of the Jazz players knew that Mike Conley had been traded before he went out for pregame warm-ups, but that he wanted to stick to his routine and get one last workout in. That is unusual. Let's see here. Any other Hardy quotes that we've heard today, friends? And thank you guys for joining the Salt City Hoops live postcast and beer. I'm going to drink a beer as I kind of look for various bits and let's see. no real details yet. Alexander Walker says, that's life, One of the good things about it is I still have an opportunity to be on an NBA team. It's just another thing to make me stronger. He's been doing a lot of reading, meditation, and deep breathing exercises. The only thing that matters is how I handle it and move forward. I love Utah. I'm thankful for Utah. So far, my experiences I've had, it's the best organization that I've been with. So another departing Jazz player has great things to say about the Jazz. It's becoming notable around the NBA that the Jazz facilities might be in first place in the NBA. I think their family culture is outstanding. You're always seeing the Jazz wives and girlfriends organizing outings together, which is always cool to see. They send. Jordan Clarkson has had a couple different girlfriends throughout the years, and they send her, cards on her birthday and flowers and that sort of thing. They care about just who you are as a person. I think that is showing out in some of these exits that we see from some of these players. They always laud the Jazz organization for that. Rudy Gay on the deadline. At this point in career, I do want to win and be a part of a team that's trying to get to the promised land, but no matter what, I'll be a professional. Yep, that was that'll be Rudy Gay for you. The consummate professional Rudy Gay. I'm curious to hear what Will Hardy said after the game. I think we're just now getting to some of the player interviews. Jordan Clarkson on Mike Conley's trade, that's a big loss. I think I'm actually a little earlier than I anticipated for checking out some of the post-game comments. So, Walker Kessler was pretty emotional tonight, talking about going through his first trade deadline. He really cares about Mike Conley. Yeah. I think Walker Kessler is going to be an interesting player in the NBA because he needs real on-court coaching for things, right? Where he's got obvious natural talent for rim protection and not fouling, and he's got great feel around he's got great hands. He keeps his feet with him. He doesn't get overpowered by things. Although there have been some times where he has gotten manned up by some longer tenured players, and so he's going to need a lot of on-court work. And you need a real point guard to help you out with that. And I think Mike Conley is just the best player for a guy like Kessler. He's the best player for a guy like Markkanen, who is learning how to be a number one option in the NBA or a number 1B option in the NBA. Colin Sexton, obviously we know that Mike Conley was in Colin's ear the entire time. Mike Conley is one of those perfect guys who goes through his career. He's one of the top point guards in the NBA. He's a point guard in the loaded Western Conference where he doesn't get an all-star nod in years that he probably deserved it, or maybe didn't deserve it against his competition, but was an all-star caliber point guard for years and years and years, joins a championship-level squad in Utah, or ostensibly was trying to be a championship-level squad, and was thrilled about that. And then you have this past offseason happen, and Mike Conley ends up being the happiest he's ever been, or at least the happiest he's been in 4 or 5 years, kind of coaching this young team and being on the court and averaging the most assists per game he's ever had in his career. His passing was taken to a new level, and I thought it was great to see Mike Conley this year. And I'm not surprised that Walker Kessler is a little emotional about losing a guy like Mike Conley, who is really helpful to improving him. Whew. Saw Rudy Gobert and owner Ryan Smith have a little bit after the game and wonder what they were talking about. Rudy still has his house here. I'm assuming they are still a little close and there's a little bit of understanding as to his trade. We still love Rudy Gobert in this house. Well, if anyone wants to drop a comment on YouTube or ask to speak on Spaces, I'm happy to take it. This beer is wonderful. Kenneth says that our friend Andy Larson says that Udoka Azubuike is the second longest tenured Utah Jazz player to Jordan Clarkson. This is a new day, friends. This is a, and Rudy Gay is probably up there too, right? I think Rudy Gay is probably third. Doak has played a little bit in the past 2 games. It'll be nice to have Damian Jones on the court, if only because he is better than Udoka Azubuike. So I will appreciate just like having real center play. Toscano Anderson can play a little small ball center, so I like having competent rebounding out there a little bit. So we'll see what we can do in the non-Kessler minutes. Because I've never been team, win as many games as possible, but I've also never been team lose as many games as possible, right? So I just want this team to just kind of go out there and show me what you're made of. Show me that Lowry Markkanen that you can be an all-star. Show me Colin Sexton that you can improve your game. Show me Walker Kessler that you are a first-team All-NBA, first-team All-Rookie basketball player, right? Like, if you can show me these things, I can get excited about these basketball games. I don't care if you win or lose. And the competition for worst team in the NBA is so strong that the Jazz were never going to be a top 3, top 4, top 5 worst team in the NBA. Just based on the quality of players they were rolling out there. I think we were all thinking that this was going to be, a 7th worst or 8th worst team in the NBA, and they've certainly surprised us, right, by being straight up middle of the pack. They have a +1 differential on the year, of course. After these past 2 blowouts, it's probably way worse. Now, they're probably net neutral in the season, which is a net neutral differential typically is a 500 basketball team. It usually will get you 41 wins. So, yeah, this trade will definitely make the Jazz worse, but I need to see that we have competent players on the court most of the time. So, that would help. Ken Clayton also says that, there's only 3 that have been here since last season. Clarkson, Azubuike, and Gay, and that's it. So, weird new team that we have going on here today. So we'll see how much the Jazz lose going here on out. Obviously, if the Jazz are not going to make the playoffs, I am rooting for lottery odds. Like I like having a better draft pick, for sure. It's more about are you hurting anybody on the court, right, by not putting out tangible, real NBA talent out there. And so we're going to have a lot of Talen Horton-Tucker backup point guard. We're going to have a lot of Rudy Gay on the floor. We're going to have a lot of Simone Fontecchio, who, like I said, I'm a Fontecchio fan. But if he's not a real player, that's going to hurt the Jazz. Of course, I want to see him perform. So I want to hope that Kessler improves. I hope that Markkanen improves. And I think they will be stunted if they don't have a competent team around them, even if they don't have Mike Conley at the helm. So, I think that will do it for our Salt City Hoops live postcast and beer. Talked a lot about the trade deadline. Jazz lose 143 to 118 after having 4 other players traded away immediately before the game. Actually, Brant, you got a request in here. Thank you for coming in. I'll prove you, man. What's going on, Brant? What are your feelings about the trade, friend? Unless that was a mistaken request, you can drop a comment if you'd like, Brant.
Are you gonna let me speak?
Yeah, I got you.
Last minute?
Yeah. I was gonna hang up, but we got folks on YouTube who are happy to hear what you have to say, Brant.
Right on. Well, hey, long-time listener, first caller, so I've enjoyed your your pull-ups here. I appreciate you giving us some insight. I just wanted to make a quick point. I've been a fan of the Jazz since like 83, 84, so and I was a little skeptic when we brought Ainge in. In fact, you could almost see the players react when he was brought in because, he was the guy that was going to come in and not really be attached to the players and try and win a chip, which, I'm sick of just mediocrity. So it's kind of a tough pill to swallow because as fans, Jazz fans were always so optimistic and we saw the good and what was going on. But ultimately, it's a genius move if you think about it. The first half of the season so many of the players that we put together hodgepodge have really increased their value. And to pull that pick away from the Lakers, I think is going to ultimately be the kind of moves that you'll see going forward. And, I think there are some questionable pieces with the 2 second-round picks included, but, with Will Hardy and how good of a coach he is, I could see him, making those 2 players have some value. Maybe we'll recoup some of that. But my ultimate point, and I don't want to be too long-winded, but, we're gonna go for it, and we'll maybe see a little tanking the last second half of the season, and if it ends up getting us a top 10 draft pick, and you add Markkanen and Kessler, and now $60+ million in cap space, we're gonna be in contention before we know it, and we're gonna forget about the pain that we're maybe feeling tonight. So I'll just listen to your comments on that as we wrap up.
Well, Brant, I'm so glad you dropped in and drop a question. We do we do the live postcast after 90% of games, I think, and love having new comments here. You mentioned Danny Ainge. I was also skeptical of being brought in because I always thought of him as the guy who doesn't get any trades done, right? If you look at his long history, I forget that his history really does go back to those Garnett and Pierce years and restructuring that team and ending up with, the first iteration of the Isaiah Thomas Boston Celtics, and then turning that into the Kyrie Boston Celtics, which, yeah, you have your thoughts on Kyrie Irving, but at the time that was a great basketball team, and they didn't have to give up a ton of assets every time. And I think the asking price for Anthony Davis, as the Lakers have found out, was way too high. The Pelicans might end up with a high lottery pick this year if the Lakers don't get their shit together from that Anthony Davis trade, because the Pelicans' asking price was appropriate. And Ainge didn't make the move there. I think I was only skeptical because it was also in conjunction with a new owner, with Ryan Smith kind of bringing in his guys, and I've kind of always trusted Justin Zanuck as a guy who had a heartbeat of the league. He knew other GMs, and he was good at the salary cap stuff and kind of understanding the off the court dynamics of how to build a basketball team. And I thought kind of bringing Danny Ainge over the top was kind of like, what would that dynamic be like? What kind of manager is Ainge? So we're seeing that he's calculated, but also the thing that sold me on Danny Ainge, and I wish I could find it, he did a podcast this past summer where he was talking about his the way he builds a basketball team, right? Or his thoughts on coaching and his thoughts on and I think it might have been Locked On Jazz. I think it was with David Locke. So David Locke as an interviewer is one thing. I can give or take him as an interviewer, but you did get a perspective from Ainge on like what it's like to build a basketball team and his vision for it. And I thought it was very, it was way more team-based and emotional to an extent, where he's like, it really does matter the culture that you're kind of forming around this basketball team. And so I thought that was quite important. And so I got more encouraged by him as a manager. What do you think about Ainge now, Brant?
Well, I actually know the conversation that you referenced. I think it was at the Jazz practice facility when he was interviewing him, and yeah, I was impressed with him. I didn't really pay attention, to be honest, with it as much when he was the GM of the Celtics. But I just like the fact that he's got a proven track record. He's made the right call, but he doesn't get like connected to them personally. Like, he's a real businessman when it comes to basketball, and I think that's what we needed, because we fall in love here with all the Jazz players, and for the good that they do in our community, and rightfully so. But a lot of times we overstate their value almost because of the connection there. And he coming in and just tearing the Band-Aid off and realizing that with Donovan and Rudy it wasn't going to be a contender. As hard a pill as that is to swallow, he made the right move, and it's starting to come to fruition. Looking back at it, but. I've been impressed with him so far, and I think it's somebody like him that when it comes to the actual assessment of talent and doing the deals. But to have someone at the top that's not connected and looking at the business side and knows what it takes to make a championship happen, that has me as most, optimistic as I've been as a Jazz fan, knowing that we're going to make the moves necessary to get there and not just be happy making the playoffs.
Yeah, and I'll add one other aspect to it that I've mentioned on a few other postcasts. The Jazz have an owner who is fuck you rich now, right? We don't have an ownership group that is the Millers were willing to pay the luxury tax for the winning basketball teams of Williams and Boozer and everything, but now we have like a capital B billionaire owner. And that is going to be a competitive advantage when you match that up with someone like Ainge who says like, hey, I understand, like, we're not going to pay the luxury tax for no fucking reason. I'm not going to do that to you, Ryan Smith, but I am going to craft basketball teams and we're going to do this together. So I think they have a great personal relationship. I think Justin Zanuck seems to be really getting along with what that's going on. I don't think he minds being a deputy. I think Zanuck loves being a transactional guy. So I think all of those sort of team building members of that organization are really great. I wonder what David Fizdale's role is, but he seems to be a good culture setter as well. So I love the suits for the Jazz right now.
Yeah, I would agree. They've got a really good team. And, back to what you're saying about Ryan Smith, I agree. Like, having that money, and I know his partners are stupid rich, too. So,
yeah.
They might, and they're all fans of basketball, too, and they get hype about it. And, they might make a radical move and take a chance and maybe even overpay. And that's what it's going to take to get players, especially free agents, to come to Utah. But, hitting the lottery with Markkinen, I mean, that was just a huge game changer for us, and as well as Kessler, like, that certainly advanced our opportunity. So
yeah.
I'm excited to see what happens next, and I expect that it's got to be Olynyk and Clarkson going next. And Gay, hopefully. I just don't see why you keep those three around anymore.
Yeah, I think that also bridges very nicely, Brant, with R. Valen's question on YouTube. He says, care to predict if any more trades are coming? I will deign to predict that because the Jazz are a lot closer to the tax than I think they want to be, as Ken Clayton mentions that they are now $3.5 million under the tax. So, by the way, the Bogdanovich for Olynyk trade saved the Jazz a little bit of money under the tax. So if the Jazz can take on a little bit of money in a transaction right now, $3.5 million is not nothing, but it's not as flexible as they could have been. By the way, if they don't make that Olynyk Bogdanovich trade, no, they still could have done this trade and stayed under the tax, based on what I remember. But anyways, who's going to get traded next? I would have sworn up and down to Sunday that Jordan Clarkson would never get traded, that we would rather just let him become a free agent and we'll re-sign him for his next contract. But I am becoming more and more and more worried about Jordan Clarkson's next contract, how much it's going to be, and how much of an anchor it's going to be on this iteration of the Jazz, right? I don't think that Jordan Clarkson's going to become some total ass basketball player in the next few years, but I'm starting to get a little concerned, right? And I do think that the asking price for him right now is 2 first-round picks. But if Danny Ainge is approaching this and saying, look, I only want premium assets, right? Will he say that Jordan Clarkson is worth an unprotected 2029 pick, right? Or a protected pick and 2 unprotected swaps, or something where he's getting some premium value out of Jordan Clarkson because his role without Conley next year and in developing Sexton, he becomes kind of a weird fit, right? And it makes me a little uncomfortable. He's obviously a great culture fit with the developing Jazz players. I think he's got a great relationship with his coach and with his ownership group. And so I don't think he's likely to get traded. But I do think that because this big trade got done, I think this is my broader point that I'm kind of circling around. Because this bigger trade got done, now you can approach Utah and be like, all right, you got your premium stuff out of the way. You got your Beasley and Vanderbilt out of the way, which isn't their highest valued assets, but they were the players that the Jazz needed to get off. And then Mike Conley was directly under that as the player who should get traded, right? If you're going to make a good play, he's the next guy to get traded. So now you're looking at the Olynyk and Jordan Clarkson level things, and it makes them more likely. I would give it, I think there is a 40% chance that one of the two of them will get traded. And I think it's 50-50 between one or the other. I think that Miami and Boston have a real need for someone like Olynyk, but Olynyk's rebounding is so bad this year. And the reason that a team like Boston or Miami is the reason they're looking for a backup center is to do some real backup center things. And Kelly Olynyk right now, he's a 7-foot wing who can't defend, right? He's kind of like Kyle Anderson for the Wolves if Kyle Anderson could shoot the basketball, right? Of course, Kyle Anderson's an actual good defender, so that's actually a terrible comparison. But Olynyk has value. I'm just not sure what team is willing to pay for him.
Well, I think I heard that Steph got hurt too, because I think Golden State would have been another team that might be interested in Kelly.
Yeah, and those have been fan-created stuff is because the Warriors have an actual need for a guy like Olynyk, I think. Especially when you're playing alongside Draymond, who could do a lot of the defensive center roles, or you can actually play Olynyk alongside Kevon Looney for a little bit. There is like the Warriors have always been wizards at putting in weird role players in great positions to succeed. And James Wiseman is a negative value asset right now. I saw from John Hollinger that if his math is correct, because of the Warriors' repeat luxury tax situation and how much luxury tax they're playing with the amount of value on their team, between this year and next year's contract for James Wiseman, the Warriors' ownership group, not their salary cap, but their ownership group, would save $72 million. $72 million if they traded James Wiseman into cap space to San Antonio or something. So obviously trading for Kelly Olynyk doesn't help that, right? Like Kelly Olynyk is making about the same amount of money as James Wiseman, but at least you're getting a contributing basketball player. So
yeah, I think it would be worth a shot. I mean, I don't know that our opportunities there anymore. I don't know if Golden State will make a win now move with Steph out, but
well, I think I think the Warriors know that if they get to the playoffs, they'll be fine. And I think the Warriors want to avoid the play-in tournament. I think the Warriors want to get to a 6 seed at a minimum. They don't want to deal with the play-in tournament that has gone poorly for them in the past. And by adding Olynyk, you are kind of helping your spacing. You're helping your team win now a little bit. And James Wiseman is not useful to this basketball team. And so trading Olynyk for Wiseman or figuring out a situation where the Warriors are improving at that position and not adding money, I think would be helpful to them. I do think Olynyk makes a little bit more than Wiseman, but that's a trade that I would love to see as the Jazz, and I really don't think will happen.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So, Valence, predict if any more trades. What other guys we have out there? I mean, look, the salary fillers, they could always be involved. The Jazz are... This iteration of the Jazz has no reason to get off of Rudy Gay's contract. We'll see Rudy Gay in a Utah Jazz uniform next year, unless he gets bought out next year. Ken says Olynyk could help that next season because he's only guaranteed $3 million. But I do think Olynyk is the type of player that, I mean, for the Warriors' expenses, you might waive him, I guess, but he's still like a useful contributor that you kind of just keep him around. Like, I always consider these non-guarantees on these NBA contracts to be like break glass in case of emergency. Like, if Olynyk is... tears his ACL and he's out for the entire next year, you can waive him and just be like, hey, look, we saved a bunch of money because of the non-guarantee. Although a lot of these non-guarantees do come with injury guarantees. But let's say like Olynyk just falls off a cliff and you're just like, you just want nothing to do with him. That's a break glass in case of emergency. It's just better to kind of keep him on the roster because you can only replace him with minimum value contracts. So, but Olynyk, because if he's guaranteed $3 million, it's not fully non-guaranteed, right? Mike Conley's non-guarantee I always thought was a hoax because Mike Conley's guaranteed money was something around $14 million. And it's like, well, you might as well just keep Conley if you already have to pay him 14 anyways just to waive him. But Lauri, isn't Lauri Markkanen's last year fully non-guaranteed? I think Lauri Markkanen has a fully non-guaranteed last year of his contract.
Wow.
I'm taking a look at this. I'm pretty sure it's fully non-guaranteed. It's partially guaranteed. $6 million. Yeah, so Lauri Markkanen in 24-25, $6 million of his $18 million is guaranteed. Isn't that hilarious, man? We got Lauri Markkanen on a partial guarantee in 2 years. So
what a deal.
So I have no real thoughts on if this Jazz team is gonna the likelihood to make trades, but I do think the Jazz are weirdly more open for business now, right? For years and years and years, we NBA fans love looking at the trade deadline and like looking around, like, all right, what's the first domino that's going to fall? Because that's going to open up all the other transactions. And the Kyrie thing wasn't the first domino, right? Like that. No, you didn't have, 80% of the league holding their butts waiting for the Kyrie domino to fall because there are only a couple teams who are interested in that. Now, you do have the Lakers involved. So getting the Kyrie answer out of the way does help the Lakers become more open for business, but I guarantee you the Jazz had conversations about Beasley, Vanderbilt, and Conley with the entire rest of the league, and I think all of those guys would have been traded if at the very least Beasley and Vanderbilt were going to be traded for the best possible deal. And there was no need for the Jazz to make the non-Lakers deal version until the trade deadline, right? And so when the Kyrie deal kind of all happens over the span of an entire last weekend, that makes the Lakers more open to business. Maybe you're getting that 2027 pick, you're getting those protections lowered and lowered and lowered, and finally you get them down to a top 4 protected pick in 2027. This deal is what I think is, if not the first domino, it's the 1B domino, right? The Lakers are done. The Lakers going all in is done. So the smaller deals that would involve a Jordan Clarkson, Kelly Olynyk, Rudy Gay maybe, those are now on the table. So I think the Jazz are more open for business than they were before. They weren't fielding calls from other teams because they're like, we got to get this Lakers deal figured out. And now that's done.
So question for you. So one of the prospective trades that I was excited about, and you've talked about it, is John Collins.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can still make that move? Because I thought they were kind of interested in Beasley, but could they be interested in Carson?
Yeah, it's going
to.
Yeah, it's going to require some salary matching, though. So part of the reason that a John Collins deal made sense for Utah is they had very neat salaries to match up to trade for John Collins. And now that would involve some combination of, I think Clarkson and Gay together would get it done. But if Atlanta's not interested in Jordan Clarkson, then you're going to have to attach draft capital on top of Jordan Clarkson, and Danny Ainge is just not going to make a bad asset play like that. So let's assume the Hawks are not interested in Jordan Clarkson. You're basically just throwing random salaries at Atlanta, and all of them are bad salary, right? Like Rudy Gay, he has a contract for next year for $6.5 million. Taylor Horton-Tucker, he has a contract for $10 million next year. Those are both player options. They're both definitely opting into that. You need another about $4 or $5 million off the top of my head to get there, and yeah, they might turn around and trade Toscano Anderson and Damian Jones for that, which we're getting from the Lakers. But you're basically throwing total garbage at Atlanta for John Collins. Now you're going to have to start attaching draft capital. And the whole reason John Collins was attractive was because there was a lot of heavy rumors around the NBA that because John Collins' contract is perceived to be very onerous, that John Collins could be had for a net neutral just swapping of salaries. And the Jazz no longer have neutral salaries to offer. They only have bad salary to offer, in which case you're going to have to give Atlanta some draft picks, which you'd have to like John Collins. So we'll see. Those conversations might be happening. I like John Collins. I don't know what you think about John Collins, but we certainly don't know what Danny Ainge thinks about John Collins.
Yeah, good point. No, I like John Collins. I like his size. I like his versatility. I think he's underutilized, as you talked about, and I think it's a potential market and repeat. And I think that's what we should be trying to do. While stockpiling draft capital for future trades, and then, like I said earlier, not underestimate the better draft pick that we're going to get now, because we're going to unfortunately lose some games for the last half of the season.
To your point, I think you raise just a fabulous point about the entire point of this rebuild, and I think we're a lot of fans are a little spoiled at how good this team is right now, if only because Danny Ainge and even Ryan Smith, they're still focused on like the 2026 NBA season, right? And so taking on distressed assets and trying to turn them into something better than they were. You mentioned this a little while ago. You were saying, hey, I think Ainge has done a great job at not rehabilitating some of these guys because they were already okay, but all of these players have improved their trade value in some capacity. So if John Collins could be had, if not for a song, if not for net neutral contract value, if you can get John Collins for, I don't know, the late first round pick that the Jazz have this year from Brooklyn or Philadelphia, right? And if you could have that and like the Gay and Horton Tucker contracts for John Collins and one other player probably, you would either like Bolmaro, I think would be salary matching for that. You could. You're taking on a distressed asset in Collins, and if Collins actually just had a peak of that 1 year where he averaged like 18 and 9, he had a couple blocks a game, and he looked like, hey, he's a 35-minute-a-game guy. He was a playoff hero, remember, just 2 years ago. And if you're looking at John Collins and saying, you are 24 years old, there is more to John Collins than meets the eye, I want him in my building to see what I can do with him and turn him into somebody who's worth $45 million like Lauri Markkanen. Is that worth the 28th pick in the 2023 NBA draft? Man, I'd be a bad GM because I would say yes.
Yeah, that's the tough part. But think about the trade we just made. I mean, most of the players we traded were on Minnesota last year. And we got a protected first from LA in 27?
27.
So, I mean, that's crazy to think about. And, I love Mike Conley, love what he did for us and everything. But, I remember at the beginning of the year, we tried to trade him. We could not trade him. So, the idea was to get him out there and see how he did and prove his worth through how well he mentors young players, and he's a great fit for Minnesota. They did good, and we would be happy with that outcome if we heard about that deal when we couldn't trade him at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I'm back to cheering for the Timberwolves. I'm very sour on D'Angelo Russell. I think he's a kind of an asshole, and he's kind of like these, if you're an NFL fan, he's kind of like the Ezekiel Elliott of the NBA, where he's considered way better than he actually is because he has scoring talent. He's a high first-round draft pick. He made an all-star game, perhaps undeservedly so, whereas there's other better point guards available in the NBA. And, he starts his career for the Lakers, so he kind of has that panache of being a former Laker alongside, Nick Young and Jordan Clarkson, remember back in those days. Now they have Mike Conley. And Rudy Gobert, we all know as Jazz fans, he's the most difficult puzzle piece in the NBA. He is not a bad basketball player. And it's not like he's being utilized poorly in Minnesota. It's just that you really do have to learn Rudy over years and years and years of playing with him. And good point guards, good distributing point guards understand a guy like Rudy. They've played with him since they were in AAU ball, right? Greg Oden's fabulous player, but Mike Conley is used to like, okay, I have a 7-footer who moves in a certain way. I'm going to learn how to play with him, right? And that first year of Conley Gobert was terrible, and it's only gotten better since. And I love Anthony Edwards. I don't like Anthony Edwards when the team is losing and playing poorly because he becomes kind of an asshole. But when Edwards is playing on a good team, he is the most fun player in the NBA. And now this team looks like a real thing this year. Like, you get Karl Anthony Towns back eventually from this calf issue he's having. You get Rudy Gobert recovered from this groin issue. They pick up the win today. They're looking like a top 5 team after struggling mightily for the first half of the season. And I'm actually going to like cheering for them again. So it's an interesting team for sure. Brant, you're always welcome on the show, brother. So if you're ever listening on the podcast or you're on YouTube, man, you said you've been a fan since the '80s. We're gonna make it another. We're gonna make it another 40 years for you, man. We're here almost every night. I live in Denver. I love doing these Salt City Hoops postcasts. We're doing more video stuff for Salt City Hoops. This is the Salt City Hoops postcast and beer. I'm always drinking a fun beer every night. I got a 9.2% bourbon barrel-aged sea salt caramel stout today, so I'm having fun. And I love this Jazz team.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm not as fancy. I'm on my 3rd Corona with lime, but hey, I'm still right there with you. So I enjoy the opportunity and hope somebody else can jump on so we can try to make the best of this interesting night of emotion.
Yeah, and I'm gonna poke one of the Claytons tomorrow to do an overall post-deadline show. I'm hoping for it to be a live show that we can do in the afternoon or in the evening or something, just to sort of or maybe on Friday to do so. And hey, I am no snob. I just like for the postcast, I like to throw on an interesting beer. But I have a treasure trove of Yanglings and Fat Tires in my garage fridge that need drinking. So after I finish this one, I'm gonna crack open one of those and see what's our schedule like tonight. Do we have any games that we're talking through right now, or is everyone done? Mavericks. So we're all done. Mavericks just beat the Clippers. Excited to see the Kyrie highlights, see how he looks. And yeah, we're here all the time, and had a bunch of great YouTube comments from Valens and Kenneth and Ken Clayton as always. And from here though, this has been a great show. So thank you for everyone for chiming in. Always great when we get the questions and the comments. And the next game for the Jazz, which means the next postcast, will be the Raptors on Friday night. It is at Toronto, so it's a 5:30 Mountain tip, which means that my postcast will happen well after the game is finished, because I got kids and stuff that I got to put down first. But we'll do a postcast after I see that game on Friday, and that might be a great trade deadline breakdown for everybody if you guys aren't too sick of hearing about the trade deadline. I'm hoping we get broader NBA transactions tomorrow. That's what I'm most looking forward to. I love the Jazz, but I also love seeing how contending teams fight for a title. Like, what are they going to try to do? I think LA is a great example of, like, what are you trying to do to fight for LeBron's championship? I do think that, the Lakers have a lot of shit players on their team, but they were able to get off of Westbrook finally, and they were able to kind of transform their team a little bit to have some shooting around LeBron James and Anthony Davis. That's a real basketball team now. And while the standings don't look great, they're in it. They're in it. And I love LeBron James, and I'm excited to see what happens to them. So this has been the Salt City Hoops live postcast and beer. Thank you all for joining the spaces. Thank you for joining YouTube. My name is Mark Pereira, and I can't wait to see what the new look Jazz look like. Hopefully we get some of these young guys some more minutes. And thank you, Mike Conley. Thank you, Malik Beasley. Thank you, Jared Vanderbilt. Thank you, kind of, to Nikhil Alexander-Walker for your contributions to the Jazz. So we'll catch you next time, Friday night, and have a good one. Good night.